share this poem that I found, and it reminded me of all of you. I see each and every one of us um, as a person that carries a light, that is a candle in to bring light to darkness um, that many of our
Hi, Annie. It's Kelly. I've just seen your message. How can I help you?
Hi.
Hi, Annie.
I just wanted to share my screen really quick and make sure it all works well before we let anybody in.
Sure. Sounds good. You should be, I'll just make sure. Okay. Do I need to promote you to a panelist in order for you to
Yes.
share your screen? Okay, great. You are now a panelist.
There we go.
Sorry, I'm filling in for Brooke and
Hey, you're doing great. Have you let anybody in yet?
Yes, I've got
Is that
28 attendees, and as soon as things are ready, I will hit the Facebook Live button.
okay? So they can't see anything that I'm doing yet, right?
I don't believe so. I don't see anything on a screen yet either.
Okay, you got to let Stacy in as a panelist.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And then I just need you to tell me if you're seeing the whole thing, okay?
Okay.
And if you can hear it.
Can hear, yes, Annie, it's all working good.
Perfect. Yeah.
Well enough, and me over the top of it.
We just see the slideshow.
You see the slideshow. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you, yes.
Can you hear the music behind it?
No.
Okay.
Oh, softly. Yes.
Okay. That's all it's meant to be. Okay. We're good.
All right. Is there anything else I need to do on my end to add another panelist or to make sure that all of the attendees are able to see this?
I
need
no
you
idea.
to make Maddie Thompson.
Yes.
She needs to be made as a host, so she has full controls of everything.
Okay.
Or a panelist or something, but she needs to have.
Great. I've just added her as a panelist.
Great. Does that give her full control to be able to handle all the tech stuff?
That I am not sure of. Sorry, Stacy. I do have this set up for Facebook Live with help from Brandon, so I am happy to go ahead with that whenever we are ready. That looks that should be ready or should be set.
We're gonna have to be able to set me so I can start my video on my own too.
Yeah, I think you can make Maddie and Brooke hosts and co-hosts.
Okay.
Like.
Let's see. Yep, perfect. Annie, you are a co-host. Apologies, I wasn't sure of that before. And I am making Maddie a co-host as well.
There we are.
Thank you. Thanks for your patience.
Hey, Kelly, you're the best.
Thanks, Annie. All right, so now you should both be able to share screens and control the format of the webinar. And I'll just leave this up, launched and rolling.
Kelly, I have a question.
Sure.
So last time as we were doing the presentation and it's streaming on Facebook, we did on the Great Plains Facebook. Brooke was able to read the questions that came through because I don't have access to that right now.
Okay.
Is there any way you can play that facilitator role?
Yes. Do you usually take questions at the end or throughout the session?
It's up to Annie how she wants to do that.
It's easier if we, I don't care. I just have to remember if I stop, I have to share my screen again.
It would be easier probably to just do them at the end. And I'll do that as I introduce Annie and do our introduction.
Okay, great. I can keep an eye on that. And then, yes, I'm happy to read those at the end.
Okay,
and then I have one more question for you, and I know we got to get started.
You today to Meth, Menace to Society, session 3 of our illegal drugs and opioids in Indian country. My name is Stacy Eagle-Elk. I'm the program manager for the Great Plains Tribal Opioid Response Program. I want to thank SAMHSA, who's made this possible through our funding as our funding agency. I want to thank our partnering programs through Great Plains, our Native Connections program, our HPOG program, and our Epi Center. A few housekeeping things to keep in mind. This is being recorded and will be posted on our website, as well as the Great Plains Facebook page, Great Plains Tribal Leaders Health Board Facebook page, the HHA Facebook page. I would like for you to hold all your questions till the end of the presentation, so we don't have to keep switching back and forth on screens. And you can feel free to either put those in the chat or raise your hand and ask yourself. And towards the end of the presentation, I will post a link for the survey, and we would really appreciate it if you would take some time, just a few minutes, to complete that survey. Today we have Annie Lloyd. She's going to present for us today. Annie is Yambushi, a community helper, founder of Recovery Communities of South Dakota, and principal manager of Blue Turtle Door, providing services as a community partners liaison and public health consultant. She has 28 years active in walking the red road of recovery and celebrates her more than 40 years of lived experience. And with that, I'm going to turn everything over to Annie.
Greetings, everybody, and welcome to Meth as a Menace in Society. We had a lot of great conversations the last couple of weeks in regarding I think that they're still working out Facebook Live. So I may wait just a few moments until I get the confirmation that the Facebook Live feed is up before I go through the presentation. I have a PowerPoint presentation for you all today so that you can look at images and see some facts and figures instead of just seeing my face today. And then there's a short video that I have at the end, and then we will take questions at the end of this. If something is really intriguing to you and you want to interrupt, please put your question into the chat, and we will do our best to see that question as I go along and go ahead and answer it then. So I am hoping that it is up on Facebook Live now. If I can get confirmation from somebody that it is, then we can get started. I'll take up a couple more minutes and just explain that the last couple of sessions that we went over, the week before was a big overview about meth and the illegal drugs in our community. Last week, we have a recording of the presentation that I did on the basics of methamphetamine and how it has come into our society and has become the challenge that it is. Today, we're going to talk about how it is affecting our society overall. So not hearing anything else from our great engineers that are working in the background, I'm going to begin the presentation. All right. So, meth, a menace to our society. So, I wanted to just give a really brief introduction once again for those of you that may not have gathered with us before. Recently, when we examined CDC mortality data from 2018, to better understand the first decline that we have seen in overdose mortality in 20 years, the closer look at that decrease revealed that there is a disturbing increase in the overdose deaths attributed to methamphetamine, meth, and cocaine. The data for 2019 shows that meth overdose deaths have continued to rise as cocaine deaths has leveled out and are expected to rise further as data from the second half of 2019 and 2020 are reported. So, what is meth? Let's recap. From previous presentations and for folks who are just joining these ongoing presentations, methamphetamine is a powerfully, highly addictive stimulant that affects the central nervous system and also known as meth, blue, ice, and crystal, among many other terms. It takes the form of white, odorless, bitter-tasting crystalline powder that easily dissolves in water or alcohol. Meth was originally developed in the early 20th century from a parent drug, amphetamine, and was used originally in nasal decongestants, bronchial inhalers. Like amphetamine, meth caused increased activity and talkativeness, decreased appetite, and a pleasurable sense of well-being or euphoria. That thing that makes you feel like you're on top of the world. However, meth differs from amphetamine in that at comparable doses, much greater amounts of the drug get into the brain, making it a more potent stimulant and also has longer lasting and more harmful effects on the central nervous system. And these are the characteristics that make it a drug with the high potential for widespread misuse. So meth is longer lasting, more harmful effects on the central nervous system, and these characteristics are what make it with a high potential for the widespread misuse that's going on in our communities today. Once you use it, you want to keep using it. So let's talk about why meth is so addictive. So when someone ingests meth, it causes the brain to release a massive amount of that feel-good chemical dopamine. And as a result, the user experiences an intense burst of euphoria. Their heart rate races and increases, and they feel like they have an unlimited amount of energy. But then the drug also has serious side effects. It causes the blood vessels to constrict, reduces blood flow to the brain and the vital organs, making a stroke, heart attack, kidney failure, and other serious medical issues much more likely. So once its effect wears off, the body's dopamine is severely depleted, so the user feels burnt out, exhausted, irritable, even depressed, and the cravings for more begin again. So in order to keep satisfying these cravings, people on meth often binge on the drug for several days in a row without eating or sleeping. And this practice has come to be known as tweaking. Because of the way meth depletes the energy of their bodies that it needs to function appropriately or correctly, users often develop this appearance of like premature aging. Meth can also cause permanent brain damage, especially to the areas of the brain that manage emotions and memory. So you can see that methamphetamine misuse greatly reduces the binding of dopamine to dopamine transporters. That's highlighted in the red and green in the stratorium. A brain area, which is that area is the area of the brain that's important in memory and movement. And so with prolonged abstinence, you can see where the dopamine transporters in this area can be restored. Deaths from overdoses of meth are rising across the United States, as I've already said, especially amongst Blacks and American Indians, Alaska Natives. In the first decade of the opioid epidemic, the number of overdose deaths rose fourfold, from about 3,400 in 1999 to 13,500 in 2009. So as meth came on and being more powerful and cheaper, the spike in deaths has been much sharper. Meth overdose deaths increased fourfold from 2,600 in 2012 to 10,300 in 2017. You see that steep increase. It's kind of like looking at COVID numbers at one point, right? So the other reality, though, is that meth users are less likely to die of an overdose than users of painkillers and heroin. Instead, meth kills most of its victims slowly. And that's the scary part about the increase in the death numbers. So let me repeat this again, is that we see this huge rise in meth deaths, and yet meth users are less likely to die of an overdose than users of painkillers and heroin. That's what's scary about what's going on. So when we look at these numbers, the meth overdose deaths surging in this 8-year period in the United States, when we analyze the numbers, what we realized, it revealed this rapid rise across all racial and ethnic groups. But American Indians and Alaskan Natives had the highest death rates overall. And these deaths involving meths were more than quadrupled among non-Hispanic American Indians and Alaskan Natives from 2011 to 2018. And the sharpest increases for men from 5.6 to 26.4 per 100,000, 2011 to 2018, and women from 3.6 to 15.6 per 100,000 from 2012 to 2018 in that group. So these findings really highlight the urgent need to develop culturally tailored, gender-specific prevention and treatment strategies for meth use, meeting that unique needs that are relatives who are most vulnerable to this growing overdose crisis. And the long-term decreased access to education, higher rates of poverty and discrimination, colonization, oppression, really illuminates the disparities that there are in health services. And all of these are contributing factors to this increase that we're seeing within our population. So, more about meth. How's it used? Well, meth comes in many forms, and it can be smoked, snorted, injected, or orally ingested. The preferred method of using the drug generally varies between geographic regions, and it has changed over time, and also the availability of resources. So smoking or injecting meth puts the drug very quickly into the bloodstream and the brain and gets that immediate, intense rush, that euphoria, that high, that sitting on top of the world. And that's also what amplifies the drug addiction's potential and adverse health consequences. The rush or the flash lasts only a few minutes, and it's described by people as being extremely pleasurable. They like it. Like I said, they feel like they're on top of the world. And you'll see it within their physical characteristics, with their jaws shaking back and forth, often described when you look at somebody, it looks like their teeth are like typewriters, right? Sorry, I got distracted. Thank you. So, because of these pleasurable effects of the methamphetamine, it disappears even before the drug concentration in the blood falls significantly. So users try to maintain that high by taking more of the drug. Some cases, people indulge in this form of binging known as a run, and they're not taking in food, they're not sleeping, and they keep up and stay up and keep taking the drug for several days. So what is the difference between meth and cocaine? So the methamphetamine molecule is structurally similar to amphetamine and to the neurotransmitter dopamine. And dopamine is this brain chemical that plays this important role in the reinforcement of our rewarding behaviors. So when you feel good, that's that dopamine response, right? When things are going on and you're walking down the street and you're holding the hand of the one you love and you get that feel good thing going on, that's that dopamine response. But it's very different than cocaine, okay? And although these stimulants have similar behavioral and psychological effects, there are some major differences in the basic mechanisms of how they work. So in contrast to cocaine, which is quickly removable from and almost completely metabolized in the body, meth has a much longer duration of action. And so a longer percentage of the drug remains unchanged in the body. So therefore, meth remains in the brain longer, which ultimately leads to the prolonged stimulant effects. So you'll see, in contrast to cocaine, which is quickly removed and almost completely metabolized in the body, like we talked about, meth has a much longer duration. And although both meth and cocaine increase the levels of dopamine, the administration of meth in animal studies leads to much higher levels of dopamine. So because nerve cells respond differently to the two drugs, cocaine prolongs the dopamine actions in the brain by blocking the reabsorption, so the reuptake of the neurotransmitter by signaling the nerve cells. At low doses, meth also blocks the uptake of dopamine, but it also increases the release of dopamine, leading to much higher concentrations in the synapses, the gap between the neurons, which can be toxic to nerve terminals. So meth use has increased, as we've said. And two of the biggest reasons why is where it's increased where it was traditionally not available, and in areas where it's already been hard hit by the opioid epidemic. Opiates cause relatively little physical damage to chronic users unless they take too high of a dose. On the other hand, meth takes a severe mental and physical toll on chronic users, destroying their appearance and substantially shortening their lives. So the last time I showed some of these photos, and one doctor has been quoted as saying, he says, if you want to look at whether or not your town has a meth problem, just go over to your big box store like a Walmart or Kmart or someplace, and you just take a look around. And the symptoms of a meth epidemic in your community are unmistakable. You see folks walking around with rotting teeth, skin lesions, extreme weight loss, and premature aging. Meth accelerates those reward circuits in the brain more powerfully than any other drug we have. And there's no doubt that it causes the most rapid downhill course of any drug. That's what Dr. Paul Early says, who is the board president of the American Society of Addiction Medicine. He goes on to say that meth users are less likely to die of an overdose than use of painkillers and heroin. Meth kills most of its victims slowly. So, interestingly, the CDC only records meth-related overdose deaths. And typically, heart failure or stroke resulting from the use of too much of the drug in a short period is not included in those, is what is included in those overdose deaths. Sorry, let me repeat that. So the CDC only records meth-related overdose deaths, which are the heart failure or stroke resulting from the use of too much of meth. It doesn't include deaths from long-term use. So despite the nation's growing recognition that the opiate crisis and addiction is a disease, society still is looking down on meth users. And you got to believe that one of the reasons that we're not hearing as much about the meth problem at a national level as we are about the opiate epidemic is that one sheriff was quoted down in the South as saying that it's that not pretty people are dying of meth as we have with opiates. So it really goes to this intrinsic aspect of oppression, of racism, of stereotyping, of judgment, of how we're dealing overall with the meth epidemic. So the challenge with meth is that it requires a very different type of public health intervention than opiate use does. So the FDA has approved 3 medications for the treatment of opiate addiction, but there is no equivalent to those life-saving overdose blocking drugs like naloxone or the MAT, the medication-assisted treatment drugs like methadone or bupropion. I can't ever say it. Anyway, thank you. I apologize. So research is under the way on meth addiction medications, but as of right now, there are none. There's some studies being done on extended release bupropion, which is sold as Wellbutrin, and extended release naloxone, but there is nothing right now that is addressing overall easing the detoxification and promoting recovery from meth addiction in regards to medical treatment. So to recap, what I'm saying is that if someone is addicted to opiates, they can get MAT, they can get medication-assisted treatment pretty quickly. But if the problem is that they're trying to kick their addiction with meth, oftentimes they're out of luck when they decide that it's time for treatment. There's just not much available. So here's a great quote that I thought that Dr. Paul Early also said, and he says, with heroin, people like Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones, they can go on using the drug for 30 or 40 years without medical problems, as long as they dose it right. But with meth, 100% of the people who use the drug experience severe and rapid physical deterioration. Get that, 100%. So when we look at this disproportionate damage that we began speaking about earlier, the data from the CDC shows that Native Americans, who make up less than 2% of the US population, had higher rates of overdose deaths from prescription painkillers and opiates than any other racial and ethnic group from 2003 to 2013. I have a story that we'll talk about here in a moment. Small tribes have been hit particularly hard. And within the Cherokee Nation, a woman who is a former justice of the Cherokee Nation Supreme Court, her name is Stacy Leeds. She's also the dean of the University of Arkansas School of Law and an expert on Native American law. And she says, when you're talking about a tribe where the entire population is 800 people, the overdose deaths of 20 people in 1 year is not just a public health crisis, it has ramifications for their very existence. So this is a picture of Nikki Baker Limore. And she's sitting there with a child she adopted from a mother who was addicted to opiates. That's the child in the center, with her other 2 children in Oklahoma. And as the opioid crisis progressed in the Cherokee Nation, more and more children were taken into tribal custody. In the Ozark Mountains, where the Cherokee Nation reformed its government after the U.S. soldiers marched members of the tribe out of the South in the 1830s, people say that the removal of the children from their native homes is the most troubling part of the opiate crisis. The earliest evidence that the opiate epidemic had found its way into Indian country came in 2014. And there was a spike in the number of children taken into tribal custody because their parents were addicted to prescription painkillers. Nearly 3/4 of the hundreds of Cherokee children who were taken from their parents because of the opiate epidemic, they've been placed in non-native homes because there weren't enough tribal families who were able to take them in. She says, so Sarah Hill, this Cherokee Nation's new Attorney General, said that nearly everyone working in the Cherokee Government Center has taken in at least 1 child. And the national statistics show that half of all children of all ethnic groups who are taken away from their parents never return home. So with more than 70% of Native children going to non-Native families in the community, that means that the tribe may lose them for good, says the Cherokee Nation's new Attorney General. She goes on to say that they can register as members because it's by blood, but their education and their self-worth are gone. The children wonder where they came from. They say, do I look like my parents? They have a lot of questions as they grow up. If you can put that child with a tribal member, pieces of the puzzle are there for them because we all came from the same background. And research since the 1978 federal ICWA shows that Native children fare better when they remain in a tribal family. The law, which requires, as most of us know, that child welfare agencies are there to place foster children in Native families whenever possible. This came into as a reaction to the decades of American Indian children being removed from tribal families and often against the family's will. It's staggering when we think about this. So one of the things that's happening over in the Cherokee Nation that is a positive thing, that in 2017, in April of 2017, the Cherokee Nation was the first tribe and one of the first governments in the United States to sue the drug companies for their role in the epidemic. The tribe filed its first case in the District Court of Cherokee Nation, but a federal court in Oklahoma ruled that the tribe had no standing to sue the drug companies because the companies were not tribal members. So in the months after the decision, Cherokee Nation filed multiple opioid cases in the district court in the county, and one of the 14 northeast Oklahoma counties that comprise the Cherokee Nation. And since then, nearly 450 other tribes have filed or joined similar lawsuits. And the Native American opioid lawsuits have been combined with roughly 1,600 others filed by cities, counties, and other groups in a sprawling mass of litigation that's being overseen by a federal court in Ohio. As we know, there was a recent, couple weeks ago, there was a big lawsuit that was settled with I think it was Purdue Pharmacies. I bring up, and we're going back and forth, I realize, between the opioid crisis and the meth crisis, but we have to look at what's going on with the opioid crisis to understand the impact with the meth crisis as well. And we go back to those numbers again, the staggering numbers of the overdose death, and that we just don't have as many statistics as we do as we did with opiate. So one of the questions is, how long should a person on meth be in treatment? So that's a great question, and thanks for asking. So one of the challenges with people going into treatment, and we're moving into that question now, is that the recommendation is that folks should be, it takes at least about 90 days just to get to a point where you can begin comprehending the information that people are sharing. But the reality is that most of the evidence outside of the United States for long-term treatment of meth, it says that it's about 3 years that really takes for folks to get going and be able to live a new life. Somebody asked if Narcan works on somebody using meth. So Narcan allows people, because with opiates, your ability to breathe becomes compromised, right? Your respirations become so minimal that you stop breathing, literally. The challenge with meth overdoses is that it's often you end up having a heart attack or a stroke. So unless somebody is using something else with the meth, such as fentanyl, for some reason, if they're mixing it, then no, Narcan's not going to work with that. And in regards, another question is there a combination of inpatient and outpatient treatment? Yes. When we're looking at treatment for meth addicts, we're talking about a combination of treatments being made available. So I'll keep going with this. We're about halfway through the slides, and I'll give you a little bit more background. I'll try to move along, and then I'll do my best to keep answering the questions as they come up. So as of right now, there are no opioid lawsuits involving tribal governments that have gone to trial. And no drug companies have settled with any tribal government over an opiate case. So, short-term effects of meth. Short-term effects of meth, as we talked about, it's this powerful stimulant. And even in small doses, it can increase wakefulness. So it makes you want to stay up. And the physical activity and decrease appetite. Meth can also cause a variety of cardiovascular problems. That includes rapid heart rate, irregular heartbeat, increased blood pressure. And then you experience hyperthermia. So that's when your body temperature increases. You have an elevated body temperature. And thus, as a result, you can end up in convulsions, sometimes seizures that can occur with meth overdoses. And if not treated immediately, that's where you get the result from death. So you can see where Narcan isn't going to be effective in those situations. So the exact mechanism where drugs like meth produce that euphoria, that pleasurable high, they're still not very well understood. But along with the euphoria, the meth use releases these very high levels of the neurotransmitter dopamine, as we've already talked about. And that happens in that reward circuit, right? So it teaches the brain, right? So meth schools the brain. It's schooling your brain. It's saying, look, you want more of this, right? This is good. I want more. This pleasure activity of taking the drug, I want more and more and more. And literally, it drives people crazy because they want so much more of it, right? And that dopamine that's involved in the motor function and its release in the reward circuit, this is that defining feature of meth, right? That's why it is such an addictive drug. So what are the long-term side effects? So as we're looking at the long-term side effects of meth use, or abuse rather, it has a tremendous amount of negative consequences, including obviously addiction, right? And addiction, for those of you that may not know, is defined as being a chronic, it's a relapsing disease. It's characterized by this compulsive drug seeking. You want it more and more and more. And not just, it's not like wanting to run more and more. It is literally compulsive. It is what you think about and dream about and are consumed with. And it changes the brain. It changes the function, how the brain functions, and it molecularly changes the brain. So we talk about meth causes this chemical traumatic brain injury. It is a chemical brain injury that results. So, and as the case with many drugs, the tolerance to meth's pleasurable effects, the tolerance to your ability to be consumed with meth is as a result when it's taken more and more frequently. So that's it. It requires more meth to get you to where you were before. So some people talk about chasing the dragon, right? Chronic meth users also may develop a feeling that any pleasure other than what they're getting by the drug helps, it pushes for more abuse, right? And then withdrawal from meth it's painful for people and often ends up with, people experiencing depression, which is ironically a lot of times why people begin taking it to begin with, super anxiety, fatigue, and this intense craving for the drug, as I've talked about. So there's a few additional symptoms, right? So we talked about that in addition to being addicted to meth, people that are using it for long term can also experience these other symptoms. So significant anxiety, confusion, insomnia, that inability to sleep, the mood disturbances, and then the violent behavior. We've heard so many times of people being on meth and ending up in gun exchanges with the police. And people that would not normally become violent or be violent or have a violent nature as a result of their meth use end up becoming violent. And they also they can display like a whole bunch of different psychotic features, such as paranoia or visual and auditory hallucinations, even delusions at times. So this is where you'll see a lot of the picking that people start doing with their skin because they think that there are like bugs or insects crawling underneath their skin. Furthermore, there can be these psychotic symptoms that can often last for months or years even after somebody has quit using meth. And we know that stress has been something that can precipitate those spontaneous reoccurrences of that psychosis in folks who have used meth and have had the psychosis before during their time. So I showed you this brain, and I wanted to come back to this real quick because, see, research has showed that meth alters our brain structure. And I talked about the fact that we talk about it as a chemical brain injury. And so as we've gone through this, I wanted to bring this slide up again and really focus in on the fact that this truly is an illness. It is a disease. This is not something folks are making up. And by no means is this something that once people get on it, that they want to continue it. There's just such an inability to figure out how to stop it. And when we look at how meth is this menace to society, in addition to all the things that I've already talked about, are these other physical effects. So I already talked about the skin sores as a result of the picking and the scratching, but also those physical effects as a result of weight loss and severe tooth decay. So I'm going to talk about this meth mouth real quick because it is something that we've never seen with the use of other drugs, with the exception of methadone, which was used to help people who were using heroin get off on heroin. So when people when heroin was really big, they began these methadone programs and used methadone as a means of helping people get off heroin. And as a result of methadone, people would lose their teeth. So somebody asked, so if a person is a user, are they considered disabled? That is per case by case. It depends on the diagnosis that the doctor prescribes for that person, diagnoses them with. It also depends on the psychiatrist or psychologist that is involved in diagnosing them with the disability. Because definitely, as you can see, there are physical ramifications, true physical ramifications that occur both within our brain functionality and motor ability, and within our overall psychosocial interactions and our ability for emotional control and emotional response. So when we talk about this meth mouth, I wanted to take just a moment and talk about this because the American Dental Association found out that in a group of 571 meth users, that 6% of older meth users had fewer than 10 teeth. 23% still had all of their natural teeth. 31% were missing 6 or more teeth. And 40% admitted that they were embarrassed about their dental appearance, and 96% had tooth decay. And unfortunately, once this tooth decay begins, and when within the mouth itself, there is no true successful treatment. The treatment usually has to do with having to extract the teeth. And I can't tell you the number of folks that I've worked with over the years that have ended up with a brand new set of choppers as a result of their meth use. So there's also, obviously, there's significant risk during pregnancy that includes premature delivery, the placenta, which is the separation of the placental lining from the uterus, and then various effects on babies prenatally that are prenatally exposed to methamphetamine, which includes like babies they're smaller size, they're lethargic, and it's not uncommon to have heart and brain abnormalities. And within our toddlers, they show delayed motor development as well. So there's also, when we think about it from a public health perspective, there is that increase in HIV and AIDS, hepatitis B and C. And of course, that's oftentimes as a result of the misuse of needles, the sharing of needles, using dirty needles. Often, it also has to do with the fact that at the beginning use of meth, so when people first begin using it, there is this increase in libido. And so there's the tendency to engage in these risky behaviors like unprotected sex. But as long-term use continues and develops into chronic use, that often actually leads to decreased sexual functioning in men. That's what they've studied. There's not a lot of studies within women. And of course, there's a link between HIV and AIDS and hepatitis B and C with all these different types of risky behaviors. So there's a story about the pull. And when we hear the story of the pull, I wanted to share this with you real quick, and then I'll take questions from y'all. Actually, I'll go into the solutions and then I'll take questions. So the quote is from a gal named Erica Haas, and Erica Haas says, "I call it the pull. It's like God tells you that if you take another breath, your children will die. You do everything you can not to take a breath, but eventually you do. That's what it's like. Your brain just screams at you." And I've heard this from so many people. "Annie, you don't understand. I didn't want to do this. I didn't want to do this. I didn't want to do this." So here's a story. So when Haas was about 24, her doctor prescribes her oxycodone for back pain. She then quickly progresses into doing heroin and then to meth. Now she's 30 in recovery, and she described this as I just quoted her, right? So although as I said, the opioid epidemic seems to be subsiding, the thing that's increasing is meth. And it has so much to do with this, that it's easily available, it's inexpensive, but it's so much harder to quit. So when Erica goes on and she's looking at her heroin addiction, and it causes her to lose everything, right? Including her kids. And she decides to quit, and she's feeling sick and she's feeling depressed as she's coming off heroin. And then somebody gives her meth and tells her that it would make her feel better. Remember, I said that the side effect of coming off meth is depression, and depression is often why people end up getting onto meth, because they want to feel better. Somebody gives her meth, tells her she's going to feel better, and it made that heroin sickness, that sickness she was experiencing of going off the other drugs, go away. Or as she describes it, it just made her feel like they didn't care about it anymore. So for a short time, she gets her kids back, but in weeks, she's back, and meth is bigger in her life than it was before. She loses custody of her oldest kids again, and she finds out that she can't quit. And then she loses custody of her youngest, who had just turned 1. And she knew it was time to quit, but she didn't know how to go about it. Somebody introduced her to a women's recovery center, and she says in her story, she says that, for every week for a month, 3 months even, this pull would stay with her. But little by little, as time went on, it got a little bit better. She went from struggling every minute to every 5 minutes to every hour, and it gets better. And now she knows, and she's learned through the tools that she gained, that when she gets that pull, she knows that she's got to find somebody that she can talk to, and that will help her remember what happened before. We talk about having a broken forgetter, that once we get to feeling better, that we forget about what happened before, and we're unable to replay that tape. So we have to stay around people that can help us. So what Western society will tell you are the treatment for meth addiction is behavioral therapies like cognitive behavioral therapy and contingent management interventions. And as I said before, there's no medications right now. So, for example, they talk about the matrix model, which is this 16-week comprehensive behavioral treatment approach that combines behavioral therapy and family education and individual counseling, 12 steps, drug testing, and encouragement for doing non-related, like non-drug activities, right? And that's been shown to be somewhat effective in reducing the meth use. And then contingency management interventions, they provide these incentives that are tangible in exchange for engaging in treatment and maintaining abstinence. And they've also been shown to be somewhat effective. And as I said, currently there's no medications. And on average, for treatment, it is recommended that they get at least 90 days in-house. Most folks throughout Europe are actually recommending, as I said, 18 months to 3 years. And you'll witness folks that are getting off meth, that relapse to happen on a regular basis. So what do we know about culture as a solution? So what we know with culture is that that a holistic approach to wellness is really deeply rooted in our traditions. And talking circles and ceremonies are very beneficial. And that mutual support that people can get from that extended tioshpaye. So having people around them, being able to not be around the same people that they're using with, being in supportive, loving environments is some of the most effective that can be used. And so 3 things in particular, so I kind of separated them out. Elders have always talked about that substance abuse problems are related to the loss of traditional culture. And one of the things that we know is this participation in any type of athletics, everything from hand games and horse races to basketball, really makes a difference for us to stay physically active. Our cultural gatherings, everything from powwows and in our traditional ceremonies across Indian country, that restores us. And for all that trauma that we've experienced, those same protective factors, that resiliency rises within us and is sparked the more we participate in that, whether we know our language or not, whether we know our traditions or not, something is sparked within us that engages us and begins bringing us intuitive thoughts and notions that we did not have before. So as I said, meth has been this menace to our society, and I hope over this 1 hour, 50-minute period that I've presented some things that you may not have known, or will give you an opportunity to have a conversation about. We got to remember that meth destroys the human. It leaves people feeling alone and without hope. It robs them of their soul, of their spirit. It takes away our ability to feel connected to anything, as though we're floating out there without any ability to be connected. It damages our mind. And it takes time for that to come back. It takes time for that mind to begin working again. And it requires creativity and healing that brain. I spoke last week about even playing cards, playing solitaire really begins assisting in the proprioceptor retraining and reconnection. And then, of course, we have witnessed the destruction to our society. Everything from the gangs and the guns and the violence and the crime that's gone on. And we all can recognize, I think, the public health issue that it is. So my question to all of you is, what will you do to make a difference? I'm going to stop sharing the screen now. I'll turn on my video, and I'll be happy to take any questions that folks have at this time. So one of the questions that, a follow-up question that somebody is asking is, so is 18 months to 3 years all residential? In some programs across the globe, yes. It would be a phased program, but we have to remember that people really begin feeling, once they're on meth and you can see the significant destruction that it does to the human being and then to our society around us, getting them out of that harmful environment and getting them healthy where they can redevelop these skills and allow their brain to heal and their physical well-being to heal really is important and essential in being able to have full restoration of their ability to interact. So I have another question over here. So somebody asked, are there pharmaceutical companies out there that are trying to come up with a solution? Yes, there are pharmaceutical companies out there coming up with a solution to address the meth epidemic. But as of right now, there's nothing that's specific for meth, like there is for medication-assisted treatment, such as there is for opiates. Next question comes, and the question is, how could we help our members off the reservation in our community? Well, we have to remember that our urban Native American population suffers not just from being in the urban community and dealing with the systemic institutionalized oppression and colonizing ways of the communities, but that separation from their families. So, our weekend basketball tournaments, our willingness to reach out to folks and stay engaged, having cultural interactions with people and making sure that we're reaching out and extending out that hoop, right? We have to look at it as really that extension of that sacred hoop and healing through this extra effort to reach out to folks. I could go on, I could talk for an hour of the additional things that we could do off the reservation in our community. Really understanding and beginning to educate everybody that we can that this is a chronic medical disease, and working on removing the stigma and addressing the stigma that there is with people in regards to meth addiction. Does insurance pay for 18-month in-house treatment? No, not that I know of. I don't know of any insurance companies that have moved to that model. Of course, the preponderance of insurance companies are paying for usually 28 days. Sometimes you can get it extended. There's been some extension of funds that have gone in for meth treatment because it's recognized that it takes longer. The 28-day model was created in the mid-'80s when mental health care was realigned with a budget under the Reagan administration. It had nothing to do with the medical efficacy of it. It had to do with insurance companies. So there's a good deal of a policy and legislation that needs to be addressed at both a state, a county, a state, a federal level to meet the needs that there are out there. Is there organized efforts in Indian country to specifically address this problem? Well, there is. And that's a great question, and thanks for asking it. So there was a recognition, and I could be wrong with this, and Stacy, you're welcome to chime in here if you want. When the opioid money, the tribal opioid response grants were written, initially it was only for opiates. And then there was this recognition of the incredible meth challenge that there is in our communities. And so there was a ruling, I guess you could say, that was made to recognize that we needed to address the meth epidemic as well, and that the monies that were funded for opiates could be used for the meth epidemic. So many of the TOR grants are being used for that right now. And if you want more specific questions, please let me know. Is the 18-month, 3-year, no, all in-house? In some places, folks stay in-house at 18 months in what they call phased transitional living. Our Medicaid in Iowa only pays for 30 days to 45 days, yes. Insurance is going to pay based on clinical necessity. That is correct. However, insurance companies, there is this design around 28 days that does not have to do with medical necessity. It was just how it was stated to begin with. What do you think about 45-day inpatient and then 12-week outpatient treatment? It depends on the individual, and it depends on the type of outpatient treatment. When we look at people, we cannot believe, we have to stop believing that there is a one size fits all. It's really important that we sit down, that we take cultural assessments with individuals, that we assess what is their network for support, what is their level of ACEs that they've experienced and the trauma that they've lived with in their life. What is the extent of their network and the availability of resources? Have they worked? Have they not worked? It's a real challenge. And so I can't give you a definitive answer to whether 45-day inpatient is going to work and then 12-week outpatient. It depends on the individual, and it depends on what they have available. Okay, the questions are rolling in. Let's see. My oldest daughter was on meth for about 3 years. She has been sober now going on 5 years. Congratulations to her. We had to call the police on her and get her arrested and take her son away. She went to treatment and turned her life around. Thank God we just now talk about the things and cry a lot and do the best we can to help others. Thank you for this information. It is so healing for me to look at all this without being in the middle of it. I'm so happy to hear that. I'm happy for you, and I'm really happy for your daughter. Congratulations. For individuals who are utilizing state contract funding, through the Division of Behavioral Health, the length of stay at any level of care is determined by the client's needs. Okay, thank you. Hi, Karen. Rosebud has a 9-month meth residential program. There you go. So anybody that wants resources, Karen Artichoker, who knows a lot going on in the community, Rosebud has a 9-month meth residential program. That's fantastic. SAMHSA published this back in June, and it highlights best practices for stimulant use disorders and highlights a program in Rosebud. And Stacy has included the link that is up there. Is it still taking clients since the COVID? So Karen, do you know, is Rosebud taking clients since the beginning of COVID? Somebody would like to know. Okay, I think I've made it through. Oh, I have more questions. Okay. Does Ayate Health have any programs to help with meth addiction? At this time, the addiction program is being run by Native Healing, and that's a program that is affiliated with Oglala Sioux Tribe, and that's located over by the fairgrounds. And I don't know if they've opened up again since COVID. I know that they were doing a lot of screenings and working with people.
They're doing a lot of online
Sarah
stuff,
Schubrick
Annie.
asks, are there culturally appropriate treatment programs that are recognized by the criminal justice system, or are they required to attend a Western-style treatment program when treatment is a contingency of release? That's another great question. There are culturally responsive treatment programs around the country. And there's one out in Washington. There are a couple up in Montana, of course, down in Rosebud. So there are culturally responsive treatment programs. I've worked with the criminal justice system in the past, and it depends on who the judge is and or the probation or parole officer in regards to whether or not they will allow the person to attend. There's many different factors that go into that decision. Okay, and Deb says, not really a question, just a thought. They came up with a vaccination that used mRNA for COVID-19. The idea was for this vaccination to block receptors for the COVID-19 attachments. Maybe they can be used in this as well in the conjunction with treatment. It's just so sad that this could be the demise of our people. I absolutely agree with you. And that's, I do believe that there are folks that are looking at many different avenues in which they can affect how meth interacts with the dopamine centers. Okay, we have more questions over here. So the response in regards to, are they still taking clients down in Rosebud? They are taking clients again, but had to stop for a period of time. Does Rosebud take clients that are enrolled elsewhere? I don't know the answer to that. Does anybody else? Yes, Stacy Crawl says yes. Stacy, I'm so grateful that you're on this. Thank you. And Karen Artichoker says yes. My brother has a brain injury from spinal meningitis and currently on meth. Will the drug make his condition worse? I don't want to play doctor here. I don't know the extent of what's going on with your brother, but I would say that it's not going to make it any better. And so it would be advisable to do all that you can to help him get off it. Are there any inpatient treatment centers for adolescents on meth? I don't know that it's specifically for meth, but Wellfully does have an inpatient adolescent treatment center. And I don't know if there's any others in the area at this time. Stacy Eagle Elk is requesting that you go on to the chat and please complete the survey. That the link for the chat is in the survey. Stacy Crawl, thank you so much for being on here. And she has put up another link for the best use practices from SAMHSA. And at this point, there are no further questions on Facebook. Thank you, Kelly. All right, at this time, unless there's any other questions that I can answer,
Annie, I have a
I
question.
will
This is
turn it back
Stacy.
over to our host.
Annie, can you hear me? I'm not
So
unmuted.
there are 3 inpatient treatment programs in South Dakota for adolescents. That is Keystone Treatment Center, Wellfully, and Our Home. Thank you again, Stacy. Anybody else? So again, I want to say thank you so much for Great Plains Tribal Leaders Health Board inviting me on today to provide some of this information to you. If you need any help, if you need any support, please let us reach out to us and we would be happy to do all that we can to support you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. Annie, I just wanted to mention to everybody, like you said, thank you for bringing up this survey. Annie, if you all could please go and complete that. And for this session, click the Menace to Society. I have a quick question, Annie, if I can. Can meth and cocaine be detected whenever there's a drug screening? Sure, she's still with us. So I'll move along. Next week, our session is going to be fentanyl and oxycodone, the opioid crisis nationwide, fastest growing cause of drug-related deaths. And we'll be with Detective Dan Rose again. He was a great presenter before he did our first session. We'll be talking about the history of fentanyl and oxycodone, drug identification, signs of use and abuse, heroin, fentanyl, drug-related death statistics. So I look forward to next week. Thank you, Annie, so much. Thank you, Native Connections in Madison and Epi with Kelly today, and to our HPROG program. And thank all of you participants for joining us today. I just look forward to next week and moving forward. Thank you, everybody. And like I said, the recordings will be posted on our Facebook, on our Great Plains page as soon as possible. Thank you. Bye.